Welcome to uncharted territories, where human curiosity meets AI capability to explore the frontiers of thought. Each episode starts with big ideas and questions selected by humans, then brought to life by our two AI co-hosts using Notebook LM. You might find their voices remarkably lifelike, part of our experiment in seeing where AI can take human-sparked conversations.
Our digital universe is exploding, consuming vast energy, leaving fleeting digital footprints. But what if the answer to preserving our legacy and managing this data deluge lies encoded within us all? Today's exploration tackles a revolutionary concept: DNA information storage. Is it truly possible to harness life's blueprint to hold everything humanity knows, securing it against the erosion of time for millennia? Could this biological solution finally curb the insatiable energy appetite of our data centers? The implications are staggering. Join us as we investigate.
We produce a ton of data these days, more than ever, really.
Yeah.
But it's pretty crazy how delicate it all is when you really think about it. Like hard drives, they can just crash and poof, it's all gone.
Right.
Or software, that gets outdated, can't access the files anymore. It's like building this incredible digital world. But on these super temporary foundations, these digital sandcastles.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Yeah, I like that. And it does, it kind of highlights the central problem we have right now, which is keeping all this information safe for the future. Long-term data preservation. How do we solve that with our current tech?
That is the question, right? All this digital stuff we're making, how do we ensure the future generations can actually, see it and use it?
Right.
But, okay, imagine this for a second. What if we had this, insanely dense storage system? Think about it.
Okay.
The entire internet squeezed into something like the size of a shoebox.
Wow.
And it wouldn't just last for a few decades. This thing would be good for thousands of years.
That's incredible.
That's the kind of potential we're talking about with DNA data storage.
It's really mimicking how life has been doing things for a very long time, storing information, passing it on. I mean, the sheer amount of data you can fit in DNA is mind-blowing.
Right.
And DNA, it's surprisingly stable under the right conditions. So we could be talking about archives that last for geological timescales.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around that, but there's been this snag, a bit of a roadblock.
Yeah.
It's like finding this ancient scroll with really faded writing, trying to make sense of it all, getting the information out of the DNA, the sequencing step. It's been painfully slow and errors pop up all the time.
Yeah, that's been the major bottleneck for sure. Like we can kind of see the finish line, but we can't quite get there yet. Writing data into the DNA also has some limitations, of course, but it's really the reading it back accurately and quickly that's been holding us back for you. It's like we have this incredible library, but it takes forever to find a book.
Right.
And you're never quite sure if you're reading the right words.
Well, hold on to your hats, because researchers over at the Henry and Marilyn Taub Faculty of Computer Science have just dropped this bombshell announcement.
Oh, really?
They've developed this AI method. They're calling it DNAformer. And get this.
Okay.
It speeds up the retrieval of data stored in DNA. We're talking about the reading and the error correction parts by mind-blowing 3,200 times.
Wow.
While also making it way more accurate.
3,200 times faster. That's a game changer.
Think about it. Something that would have taken days, maybe even weeks, could now be done in minutes.
It really puts the practicality of this whole thing in a new light.
Absolutely. And the team behind this, Omar Saberi, Dr. Daniela Barlev, Dr. Ita Awar, Professor Etan Jacobi, and Professor Tuvietsian.
Impressive group.
They published all this in Nature Machine Intelligence, and it seems like this could be a real turning point. Yeah.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, it's a fundamental hurdle they've cleared, and it could change how we think about archiving information forever.
It's exactly what we're going to be exploring today, the potential of this breakthrough for creating these ultra-dense, super long-lasting data archives. And we'll dig into what this might mean for society down the line.
Sounds good.
So for anyone who's maybe not familiar with this whole idea, let's break down how storing data in DNA actually works.
Sure. So basically, it's all about translation. You know, our digital world speaks in zeros and ones.
Binary code.
Exactly, binary code. But DNA It uses these 4 chemical building blocks, they're called nucleotides, and we represent them with the letters A, C, G, and T.
Okay.
So DNA data storage, it takes those digital zeros and ones and maps them onto specific sequences of these 4 bases.
So it's like we're translating our digital language into the language of life.
Precisely. And one of the things that makes DNA so incredibly dense is its 3-dimensional structure. It's not just a linear string. It coils and folds up,
Right.
allowing you to pack a ton of information into a tiny space.
Okay, so to get the data into the DNA, scientists have to create these custom strands. That's the writing process or synthesis.
Right.
And to get the data back out, they need to sequence those strands,
Yeah.
the reading process.
Exactly. And as you mentioned earlier, one of the big challenges with DNA storage has been this reading or sequencing step. Imagine trying to piece together a giant encyclopedia that's been shredded into millions of tiny pieces.
Oh, wow.
Not only are there a ton of pieces, but some might be damaged or missing. That's where those errors come in.
Like missing words or typos in our shredded encyclopedia.
Yeah, a good way to think about it. So DNAformer comes in, and it uses AI to figure out this insanely complex puzzle.
So it's like the AI is this expert puzzle solver that can deal with missing pieces and figure out what should be there.
Precisely. And what's really cool here is they've used this type of neural network called a transformer model.
Okay.
And they trained it on a massive amount of simulated DNA data. They even developed the simulation tool themselves at Technion.
Oh, wow. So they basically created a virtual DNA playground for the AI to learn in?
Exactly, by exposing it to tons of examples of how errors can happen during DNA synthesis. And sequencing DNAformer learns to spot those patterns of distortion.
So it's like the AI has seen all the ways the encyclopedia can be messed up.
Right, and from those messy, error-filled copies, it can reconstruct the original accurate sequence.
That's amazing. And this is what leads to the crazy speed increase and the improved accuracy.
Right, and it's important to remember that this breakthrough is focused on the reading, not the writing speed yet, at least.
Good point.
Yeah.
So while this is a huge step forward, making the retrieval faster and more reliable, there's still work to be done on the speed and cost of synthesizing the DNA, the writing part.
Absolutely. That's still a challenge for making this technology truly practical on a large scale. But hey, this new development makes all those potential advantages of DNA storage,
Right.
all those things we've been talking about, they suddenly seem a lot closer.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture now, starting with something that DNA is basically perfect for long-term preservation.
That's right. We're talking about timescales that are hard to even comprehend. You know, back in 2013, scientists extracted DNA from a 700,000-year-old horse bone.
Wow.
Found in Denmark. And then there was that amazing discovery in 2021, DNA from mammoths over 1 million years old.
It's incredible that we can even do that.
And you compare that to even the best hard drives we have today, you know, those might last a few decades if you're lucky.
The difference is unbelievable.
It really is. We're talking about preserving information for millennia, and that changes everything about how we think about safeguarding our data.
And there's also the energy aspect. You know, keeping all these massive data centers running,
Yeah.
it takes a ridiculous amount of power.
It's a growing concern for sure. Data centers already gobble up something like 3% of the world's electricity and contribute about 2% of all carbon emissions.
Wow.
And that's only going to increase as we generate more and more data. So one of the big advantages of DNA storage is that it potentially uses way less energy for keeping those archives safe once the DNA is synthesized
Right.
and stored properly. It doesn't need constant power like those hard drives.
It's like a one-time energy investment, and then it's good for thousands of years.
It's a huge potential benefit for the environment, and then we can't forget about the sheer data density that DNA offers.
Right? It's mind-boggling how much you can pack into such a small space.
It's hard to grasp, really. DNA can store up to 100 million times more data than traditional digital storage in the same volume, so...
So let me get this straight. Something that holds 1 megabyte today
Yeah.
could theoretically hold 100 terabytes with DNA.
It's like a whole different scale of storage capacity.
So we've got DNAformer tackling the reading speed and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
DNA itself offers this incredible longevity and density.
Right.
And we can see some major energy savings down the line. Let's dig a little deeper into how DNAformer actually works. It's magic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've touched on the AI and the simulated data.
So what they did was they didn't just create DNAformer, they also built this really sophisticated simulator to train it with.
Oh, so they basically gave the AI a realistic virtual world of DNA to learn from.
Exactly. And in this simulator, they could generate a ton of synthetic DNA data, but it wasn't just random. It included all the different types of errors that you'd see in real DNA sequencing.
It's like they gave the AI a crash course in all the ways DNA data can go wrong.
Right. And DNAformer, being a transformer model, is great at finding complex patterns in sequential data, so it's perfect for deciphering those messy DNA sequences.
So the AI is trained to expect the unexpected.
And on top of that, they added this custom error correction code,
Okay.
specifically designed to handle the kinds of errors that pop up in DNA storage.
So it's not just a general purpose AI. They fine-tuned it to work with the quirks of DNA.
Exactly. And they even built in this extra safety margin mechanism.
What does that do?
Well, think of it this way. Sometimes you come across particularly difficult DNA sequences. Maybe they're really damaged or fragmented, like those really messed up pages in our encyclopedia.
Oh, I see.
So when DNAformer spots these tricky sequences, it calls in the big guns. It uses more advanced algorithms to try and recover that data.
It's like having a special team of code breakers on standby for those really tough sections.
That's a good analogy, and the end result is that DNAformer takes those scrambled, error-filled DNA sequences and reconstructs the original digital information with incredible speed and precision.
That's pretty amazing. And the article mentioned some specific examples of the types of data they successfully retrieved.
Oh, yeah. They managed to get a color photograph back, a 24-second audio clip of Neil Armstrong's famous words on the moon, some written text that actually explained the benefits of DNA storage itself.
Yeah.
A bit meta, right? And even completely random data, which shows that it can handle encrypted or compressed information.
So it's not just good for one type of data, it's versatile.
Exactly. And remember that 3,200 times faster speed increase compared to the most accurate existing method without sacrificing accuracy.
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment.
And they even saw a 40% improvement in accuracy over other faster methods while drastically cutting down the processing time.
Wow, those are some serious numbers. This could totally change how we think about long-term data archiving.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about some of the broader implications now, starting with the economics of all this. If this technology takes off, what kind of economic shifts might we see?
Well, if you really think about it, this could lead to a whole new industry, a DNA archival industry.
Okay.
Governments would want to preserve important records for centuries. Research institutions could archive their valuable scientific data, and even corporations facing long-term regulations would need this.
Makes sense.
So we could see a surge in companies that specialize in DNA synthesis sequencing and data management for this new type of storage.
And this could also mean we might need fewer of those giant energy-hungry data centers.
Right. We could see a shift away from traditional data center infrastructure for archiving, at least, and that would lead to some serious cost savings in the long run, not to mention the environmental benefits.
It sounds like this could really shake up the digital storage market as we know it.
Oh, for sure. The big players, the cloud providers, the hardware manufacturers, they'd have to adapt, and we might see some consolidation as DNA storage becomes more practical.
And investment would probably shift towards biotechnology and DNA-related technologies.
Definitely. But we also have to consider the potential downsides.
Like what?
Well, in the beginning, DNA synthesis and sequencing are going to be expensive. So there's a risk of creating a data preservation divide where only the wealthy organizations can afford this ultra long-term storage.
I love the point.
And there's always the possibility of monopolies forming around key technologies, and we can't ignore the potential for job losses in those traditional data center roles.
Yeah, those are all important factors to consider, and making sure everyone has access and preventing monopolies will be crucial as this technology develops.
I agree.
What about the impact on society and culture? I mean, the idea of having near permanent storage for everything is pretty profound.
It is. It really makes you think. Imagine future generations having access to unaltered records of our time. We could safeguard cultural heritage from being lost or destroyed.
That would be amazing.
And individuals could store their entire digital lives, creating this incredibly rich digital archaeology for future researchers to study.
It's almost like achieving a kind of digital immortality, but are there any potential downsides to that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the inability to forget is a big one. Societal traumas, personal mistakes, those embarrassing moments we all have. They could be preserved forever.
Yeah, that's a bit unsettling.
It could have a big impact on our psychology and our social dynamics, and we'd be facing information overload on a scale we've never seen before.
And then there's the potential for misuse, right?
Oh, absolutely. Perfectly preserved historical or personal data could be used for manipulation or control.
That's a scary thought.
And we might even lose some of the charm of digital culture. The fleeting trends, the spontaneous interactions that make it unique. If everything's permanent, it loses that ephemeral quality.
So this idea of not being able to forget is pretty thought-provoking.
It makes you question the nature of information and how it relates to our lives.
Yeah, and how do we even ensure that future generations can access these archives and that they remain authentic over thousands of years?
Those are huge challenges.
And the debates about data ownership and privacy, they're going to get even more complex.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about such long time frames and potentially changing legal systems.
It really blurs the lines between what's data and what's something much more personal and significant, and who gets to decide what gets preserved for all of history.
Those are tough questions.
Definitely not easy answers.
Sure.
We've talked about the energy use in data centers, but what about the overall environmental impact?
Right. So while the long-term energy savings for archival storage are a big plus, we have to consider the environmental costs of DNA synthesis, and sequencing those chemical processes need resources, especially the nucleotide building blocks themselves.
Oh, right. So we need to make sure those materials are sourced and produced sustainably.
Absolutely. And we need to think about the potential ecological impact of large-scale DNA production and disposal. Could there be unintended consequences like biological contamination? Those are things we need to research carefully.
So it's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah. And
Economic shifts can impact the environment, which in turn can have social consequences. What about the geopolitical side of things? Could this technology shift global power dynamics?
It's definitely possible we could see more international collaboration on preserving shared cultural heritage.
That'd be great.
It could also make it easier to store and share important scientific data across borders, but there's also the potential for competition. Countries might race to become the leading centers for DNA data storage, like the tech hubs we have today.
And we need to agree on international standards for encoding and retrieving the data.
Absolutely. And countries with advanced DNA storage capabilities might have a strategic advantage being able to securely preserve vital information for the long term.
We're talking about potential economic upheaval, profound philosophical questions, and possible geopolitical shifts. This technology is full of possibilities, but also a lot to think about.
It is, and that's before we even get into the more speculative side of things. The source material mentions some pretty wild ideas like living libraries and digital ghosts.
Yeah, let's explore those a bit, shall we?
Okay, so living libraries. That's the idea of using bioengineered plants or bacteria to store data.
Wow.
Imagine accessing information through biological signals, or even having ecosystems acting like distributed computer networks. It really blurs the lines between the digital and the biological world.
That's mind-blowing. And what about digital ghosts?
So that's the concept of using advanced technology to capture so much personal data that you could create incredibly realistic AI simulations of people who have passed away.
Oh, wow. That would change how we deal with grief and understand identity.
It would raise a lot of ethical questions, too.
For sure. And there was that idea of DNA heirlooms.
Passing down DNA as a form of inheritance?
It challenges how we think about value and what we leave behind. Could a vial of DNA containing someone's life story be more valuable than any physical possession?
It's an interesting question. And then there's the potential for merging DNA storage with synthetic biology.
Yeah, like what?
Imagine organisms that are designed to process data or biological sensors that write information directly into their own DNA. The possibilities are endless, but so are the potential risks.
It's both exciting and a little terrifying at the same time.
I agree. And then we have cosmic time capsules.
Sending DNA archives into space.
Right, maybe as a message for other civilizations. And on the flip side, there's the idea of a ministry of forgetting, actively regulating the deletion of data.
That's a wild concept.
It shows how we might need to manage the permanence of information in the future. And then there's the idea of history as forensics.
Like future historians analyzing our entire digital lives in minute detail.
It makes you think about how we'll be judged by future generations with access to all that information.
It's a fascinating and slightly unnerving vision of the future. The source material also brought up some fundamental questions about what we might lose with perfect permanent storage.
Yeah.
The idea of viewing life itself as just data.
Those are important questions to consider. If we can store everything perfectly, do we lose something essential about being human? The ability to forget to reinterpret the past, to grow from our mistakes.
That's a good point. And using the building blocks of life to store information, does it make us start to see life itself as just data to be manipulated?
It's a slippery slope, and then there's the vulnerability of a global DNA archive. What if it's compromised or controlled by someone with bad intentions?
That's a sobering thought.
Game.
So looking ahead, what are some of the steps we might take to make this technology more widely adopted?
Well, the first steps, probably within the next decade or so, will likely be niche applications.
Go.
Governments, research institutions, maybe some big corporations with long-term data needs. They'll be the early adopters.
Right.
And AI-powered retrieval like DNAformer will be crucial in the beginning. DNA synthesis will probably still be pretty expensive and slow, but then we might see an acceleration phase.
When would that be?
Maybe 10 to 30 years from now, and it would depend on some major breakthroughs in making DNA synthesis cheaper and faster. We'd also need to develop industry standards for encoding and decoding the data, and maybe cloud providers would start offering hybrid storage solutions using DNA for those long-term archives.
That makes sense. And we'd likely see the beginnings of ethical frameworks and regulations.
Right. So what are the big roadblocks right now that are preventing wider adoption?
Yeah, what are those?
The main ones are the cost and speed of DNA synthesis, the writing process,
Right.
Scaling up those chemical processes to handle huge amounts of data efficiently and affordably is a big engineering challenge. And then there's data security. We need strong encryption standards specifically for DNA storage, and public acceptance is important too. People need to understand and trust this technology, and we have to address those ethical concerns we talked about. And of course, there might be some pushback from the existing digital storage industry.
So how do we overcome these challenges and move towards using DNA data storage more broadly?
Well, we need to invest heavily in research and development, like what happened with the semiconductor industry. We need innovative approaches to DNA synthesis that are faster, cheaper, and more accurate, and international collaboration is key. We need to agree on standards and ethical guidelines, and we need to show people the tangible benefits of DNA storage, that incredible longevity, the density, the potential environmental advantages, and we probably won't see a sudden switch to DNA storage. It'll be more of a gradual integration with existing systems.
So if we look way ahead, say 30 years or more, what might a world with widespread DNA data storage look like?
Well, it could become a standard part of our data infrastructure, especially for long-term archives.
Right.
We might even see DNA-based storage options for individuals who want to preserve their personal data forever.
Wow.
And some of those more speculative scenarios, like biological data centers or storage within engineered organisms, they might become possibilities, though they come with a lot of ethical and practical challenges. And by then, we'd probably have a much more developed set of rules and regulations around DNA data storage.
It's a fascinating but complex future. So let's bring it back to our main topic today, this amazing AI breakthrough in reading DNA data. What's the biggest takeaway?
The key takeaway is that DNAformer has really changed the game for DNA data storage. By dramatically improving the speed and accuracy of retrieval, it's removed a major roadblock. And now the idea of having data storage that's super dense, lasts for thousands of years, and potentially uses less energy, it's suddenly much more realistic.
So what are the biggest potential benefits and the most important challenges or opportunities as we move forward?
Well, the most exciting thing is the potential to preserve humanity's knowledge and cultural heritage for future generations.
Absolutely.
And to reduce the environmental impact of our growing data storage needs. But the big challenge and opportunity is figuring out how to ethically and responsibly use the building blocks of life for storing information.
Right.
We need to ensure equitable access, data control, security, and we need to be prepared for any unforeseen consequences.
So this AI breakthrough has brought us closer to a future with near-permanent, incredibly dense information archiving. We've talked about the potential for long-term preservation, energy efficiency, and mind-boggling storage capacity.
And we've explored some truly wild speculative implications.
Living libraries, digital ghosts, a lot of thought-provoking stuff.
It's a real paradigm shift, the way we think about information itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you to ponder in a future where we can potentially store information for thousands of years using the very essence of life. How will that change our understanding of time and memory? And what will it mean to be human in a world where forgetting might become a conscious and maybe even difficult choice?
That's a great question.
Will we need to find a balance between the desire for perfect preservation and the natural processes of change and renewal?
I think so.
It's a question that will shape not just our technology, but how we see ourselves and our place in time.
It's something we all need to think about.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Uncharted Territories, where human curiosity meets AI capability. This episode was a creation of the AI Plus Roundtable, blending insights from the human producers at Innovation Toronto, with analysis co-developed using powerful AI capabilities, tapping heavily into models such as ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, with support and contributions from a wide range of other AIs. Our main AI hosts are voiced by Notebook LM, along with additional voice contributions from Microsoft. A sincere thank you to everyone involved in this unique human-AI partnership. Continue exploring with us on Substack at airoad.substack.com for show notes, further reading, and more content. That's airoad.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in to this AI Plus Roundtable production. We hope you'll join us again as we continue charting the territory where human creativity and AI capability converge.